unrelated question, in my opinion, is the extent to which socialism in the form of freebies or government support or supposedly popular schemes has A, manifested itself in government policy, and B, the consequences of that for the fiscal situation of the state. So in that perspective, I would say, it is very hard to easily categorize all freebies or all socialist welfare measures as kind of financially profligate or irresponsible. I made this statement on behalf of the DMK. I presented before the 15th Finance Commission when it appeared here. And I said, I personally have a view that there are at least 3 or 4 types of freebies. There are freebies like the noon meal scheme, which from an accounting policy we count as current year revenue expenditure. But in fact, in my opinion, is capital investment into the development of human beings. There are schemes like giving, laptops to college students or cycles to, school students or so forth, which again I would consider in policy terms as investments in the future rather than the accounting, model of revenue expenses. I would even go so far as to say there are schemes in the insurance space, like health insurance, or for that matter, marriage assistance. Because as you know, in developmental economics, when we study this, we say it's one thing to lift a man or a society or a family up from this level to this level. It's another thing to keep them there. And very often what doesn't keep them there is unforeseen events, or in some cases, foreseen large ticket events, like a wedding expense. Right? Of course, everybody knows they're going to have to spend on the wedding. But how does a daily wage worker or a 20,000 rupee a month employee, especially in a country where the banking system is not that efficient and access to credit is not good, certainly unsecured credit is almost not available in the system, you have to go to money lenders. In that kind of society, a wedding can be something that sets you back a decade. Right? You have to spend 2 or 3 lakhs, you don't have that kind of money, you borrow, the interest rates are usurious, and then you end up paying that for the next 5 years or 10 years of your life. So even the marriage assistance schemes, I would say, are social welfare measures that provide insurance from falling behind once you have reached a certain stage. Then personally, I can look at many schemes and say either they're just unimplementable or badly designed, or should never be touched in the first place. And I'll give you like 3 or 4 examples, right? Just because we're talking in detail now. To me, the Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme is a fantastic scheme if you actually make sure that some productive work happens for the salary that is given. Of course, you want to give minimum, it's equal to giving a minimum kind of, income, in a different way. But were you to give that income when they did no work, you are, in the technical definition of the sense, creating inflation because you have pumped more money into the system for zero increased productivity. That is the definition of inflation, right? More money chasing the same or fewer goods is inflation. On the other hand, if they actually did something, and there's so much to do, like, desilting tanks, like pruning kind of roadside stuff, like supporting agricultural workers, like, there's so much that can be done that needs to be done. Then it becomes almost like the Great Works program of, the 1940s after the war, where Eisenhower's administration decided to build the interstate system, not because they needed the roads, but because they needed to provide employment. And in the course of providing employment, they built this fantastic road network that ended up transforming the economy for the next 20 or 30 years, because it was just such a, economic value add in terms of goods transportation, people transportation, cost reduction, time reduction, etc. It was a huge productivity boost. So there's a scheme which in implementation can go either way. It can be a fantastically good scheme. It can be a by design inflationary scheme, and not just that, it'll have second order, third order knock-on consequences. If I go to a rural area and I start paying people to do nothing, surely the wages for people who do something then climb dramatically. Then the cost of agricultural output increases. So in this case, it's not just hypothetical or theoretical inflation, is direct inflation in fundamental things like rice or vegetables which are produced from the rural areas where the Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme works. Then you look at schemes like, in my opinion, the cow and goat scheme. Now, I'm a member of the Public Accounts Committee, so I see of the Assembly, so I see the audit reports. In my mind, these cow and goat schemes are not workable. Right? They are simply too complicated and require too many checks and balances to be practically executable. They are nice to announce, they're catchy, what we say in Tamil, kavarchiya, but they are not practically implementable because there's so many ways it can fail, and we see in the audit reports that it fails all the time. Right? Then you look at schemes, in my opinion, which are blatantly kind of, for lack of a better word, ill-conceived and pointless and, counterproductive schemes, like the subsidy for two-wheelers, for powered two-wheelers. Now, here you have a state that is running something like a 14 or 12 crore loss a day, operating a public transportation system, and not, where there's demand, there's not enough buses, and where there's buses, there's too much demand, right? Like in what do you say, non-productive routes, the government is not supplying enough support, and in city routes, there's not enough buses, right? So you have a system that's failing in every way. Instead of encouraging the development of that system and fixing it and spending your money on that, you start going ahead and doing things like providing free two-wheelers. How many people can you possibly impact? It is bad in design, it is bad in conception, it is bad in implementation. I'll tell you, they say they're going to help 1 lakh people. I mean, we are a population of like 7 crore. What are you going to do by helping 1 lakh people? What will it do to the average productivity? The subsidy is 25,000 rupees. That is a lot of money. The widow subsidy, the disabled monthly pension is 1,000 or 1,500 rupees. You're giving 2 years worth in one check. You think there's going to be corruption and malfeasance there or not? Of course, it's going to happen in droves. Then what you have? You have another 1 lakh scooters and two-wheelers on the road in a place where there's not enough kind of road capacity for the traffic. So you're increasing congestion. Now, whatever benefit you're giving those 1 lakh people, the remaining 10 lakh or 20 lakh people on the road are already going to pay the price by increased congestion, and their productivity goes down, the traffic congestion goes up. Then you have environmental pollution. Surely it's going to be better if they rode in 50 or 100 buses instead of 1 lakh two-wheelers. So it is a policy that is designed badly, implemented badly, conceived badly. It is irredeemable in my opinion. And yet we have that also being done. So now if you say, are all schemes the same? The answer is no. Separately, I take it to a third level and say, are these schemes the reason for the deficit of the state? I actually have to think no. If you actually look at the math, the reason for the deficit of the state starts with number one, revenue mismanagement. If we had been managing revenues as the trend from 2003, when the FRA Act was passed, till 2012, let's say, it was the pattern. Today, the state's revenue should be about 25,000 crores more. So somewhere the system has failed in the last 4 or 5 years. It's only after 2014. I can point to this day that at least what the paper says, what the data says, the day that Ms. Jayalalitha's hands came off the tiller, the day she went to jail for the first time in Bangalore unexpectedly without having laid plans in place. From that day, the state's finances have deteriorated and gone through the floor. And we can show that mathematically. I've done it many times. And we went till that day, we had never had an annual revenue deficit of greater than 2,000 or 3,000 crores. In fact, the cumulative deficit of 11 years from 2003 was only about 1,000, 2,000 crores because the 5-year DMK regime from 6 to 11 had run a revenue surplus government. Over 5 years, they had run a 2,600 crore revenue surplus government. From 14 till now, the annual revenue deficits have plummeted. This year, we'll end up something like 16 or 17,000 crore revenue deficit and something like 40, 50,000 crore fiscal deficit. This is a recent phenomenon, and this phenomenon has many components, the freebies being the least of it. It is bad revenue management, it is bad expense management, it is bad interest management, it is excessive debt taking, it is horrendous mismanagement of the finances in every way. If this was a company, by now the market would have insisted that the entire board be fired. Right? We should not have these people managing the economy.